Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day. I want to continue this thought. We celebrated in our last video, we were celebrating Easter, the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. I'm going to attach a link below to the She Is podcast. That's my wife's podcast. And she talks about that feeling on Easter Sunday morning of what the disciples and the women and all of those that followed Jesus the Christ would have been feeling. A lot of angst, I'm sure, and a lot of fear and a lot of grief. Were they really looking hopeful? And she shares in her podcast this past week about, that's something we get to choose for every day, which prompted me. A few weeks ago, had been going through my study and my thought and my heart and just thinking about this phrase. And then Susan and I had a discussion on this morning, actually. And so I just really felt prompted to share this idea and this whole concept. Jesus says this phrase that I don't think we often think about. He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." He also says, and scripture also says, that the joy of the Lord is my strength. Yoke, burden, and joy. And I believe those all coincide with one another and have that same idea. It says, my yoke is easy. Jesus said this, my yoke is easy. And he's talking about, obviously, a yoke being when you yoke like two oxen or two animals of any kind. You take two animals and you yoke them together. You put this, wooden thing in his case and bridled thing that hooks the animals together. And so he's talking about that his yoke is easy. It's not a manipulative and controlling yoke. Being a part of the kingdom should not be, going to the next phrase, burdensome. And I think far too often, his burden being light. It's not a heavy burden that we should be carrying. We shouldn't be carrying it for our own lives. We shouldn't be carrying it for others people's lives. That has nothing to do. Don't mistake caring for people and loving people with being burdened by them or for them. There's a great thing in having empathy, and I'm married to one of the most empathetic people I've ever met in my life, and she feels other people's pain, sometimes to a fault because of the burden she carries for them. We're not supposed to we carry one another's burdens in the sense of we walk through life with one another, strengthening and encouraging one another, but not so burdened down that we become non-functioning in our lives. We live in a society where people are burdened. We live in a society where people are yoked horribly, in situations, and unequally yoked. It talks about that with marriage. They're unequally yoked. They're unequally yoked in all kinds of relationships. And Jesus is saying, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And then the last thought is that the joy of the Lord being our strength. Yoke, burden, connect us to joy. And joy is not just happiness. It is thoroughly living in a place of perpetual joy. And I get it. We face grief, we face loss, we face hard times, we face trouble and trials and tribulations. I get it. I understand that. That's life. That is part of living in this earth. But being part of the kingdom, Jesus is saying that's not a troubling thing. It's not difficult to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's not really, that's some pretty simple commands, some pretty simple things. And we really learn to lose our joy in life We really learn because, oh, I gotta do this, 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 you know, and we just, here's my routine. We miss the joy of God actually strengthening our spirits because we're so burdened down and we're so heavy yoked of, oh, you know, just this. That's not what Jesus was saying. Paul talks about this. He says, I've been learned to live content when I've had little and when I've had much. There's a joy inside of him that nothing can take away from us. And I want to encourage you today that you have to move into and enter into and surround yourself. This isn't about other people. Surround yourself with God's presence. And that's not lost in worship kind of thing. That's a, God, I'm relying on you and your joy for my life. And there is nothing better. I'm not relying on someone else to make my life joyful. Some other situation. If I buy this, if I buy that, if I get this, if I have that, then I'll be joyful. Then everything will be hunky-dory. It's not going to happen that way. It never will. We need to learn to live under the yoke of easiness. And that's what God said. It's an easy yoke. And his burden being light. It's not a heavy thing that he's trying to put upon us. It is truly the lightest thing that we could ever take on into our lives. And sometimes religion clogs that up, and sometimes it gets in the way and it becomes burden. Religion can be very burdensome, and that is not God's kingdom. God's kingdom is a simple one. Let's just love him and love others. Listen, I love you today, and I bless you with health and healing and wisdom and knowledge and power and prosperity and the gifts and the fruits of the Spirit of God to be evident and flowing in your life. And I pray you have a fantastic week.